Hello, and welcome to Waiting on the Trade, The Dream Journal, a mini-series discussing the original run of Neil Gaiman and Co.'s The Sandman. I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck, and with me is my constant friend and co-host, Matt Ledger.
Hello.
And joining us on this exploration of the dreaming is our good friend and frequent guest host, Mike Drew.
Salutations! I'm peachy keen to be here.
All right, gentlemen, this episode we're kicking things off with Volume 1, Preludes and Nocturnes. Matt, you want to give us a quick rundown of what happens in Volume 1?
In Volume 1 of The Sandman, we meet Morpheus, also known as the King of Dreams, also known as Cthulhu, also known as Lord Lazoral, also known as the Prince of Stories, also known as Just Dream. And we see the consequences of mortals meddling in his affairs. Initially, Dream is trapped by a British cult leader, stripped of his objects of power and held prisoner for a human lifetime. After Dream escapes, he seeks out his artifacts, and he finds that mortals and demons alike have taken advantage of his absence. At the end of this volume, we're introduced to the first member of Dream's family. And that's the book. We did it. We read it. All right.
Yeah,
Pack it up. Let's go home.
All done. We did it.
True.
No, Pat, do you want to explain how this mini-series will work?
Okay, so this mini-series is going to be more structured, hopefully. More focused, obviously.
Oh, yeah. You can tell by how the intro's going.
Obviously. We each brought our own discussion question to help narrow our gaze into the Sandman and its series. Mike, you remembered to write down a discussion question, or should I say, you remembered to pick a discussion question, right?
I'm sure I picked one or two or something.
Well, why don't we start with yours?
Oh, sure. Let's do it. My two questions were about trying to determine what the most heart-wrenching death in this volume was, and I had a secondary question about why the art is.
First, let's take them one at a time.
Okay, so what is the most heart-wrenching death in this volume? There's a lot of death in this volume.
We meet her at the end.
No. She's the most heartwarming death. There we go.
Yeah.
She is peachy keen, as the kids say.
There we go.
Well, Mike, do you have a death that you're particularly skeeved by?
Oh man, there's a few. The short answer is yes, and it is in the last volume. It's the baby. That gets
knew it.
me.
I knew it, Mike.
But that's only because I'm a father, and that I don't think that bothered me when I first read through it. Back when I first read through it, I think something in the diner with the. I think
One of the occupants of the diner.
Yeah. With where you see her with literal like pins poking out of her eyes at the end there. That bothers me somewhat.
Yeah,
But
like sewing needles through her eyes.
Yeah, I think it's the baby now. I don't know.
Well, there's something really tragic, right? Just like it's an everyday kind of tragedy that could like happen to anyone. It's not some supernatural entity or demon ripping you in half. It's just sudden death syndrome. Isn't that what it's called?
Yeah. Sudden infant death syndrome, I think is what they call it.
STIDS.
Yep. And it's just so real and so it's heart-wrenching. It catches you from the side there at the end. It's like, oh, we're going through all these we're going through some deaths that aren't as awful as the ones we've seen, and then we see this one, and it gets me. It gets me at the end there.
So I actually had the exact same answer. I think it's actually the correct answer. So Pat, whatever you say is going to be wrong.
Wow, already just drawing that line. Good.
No, not really. But I think my reason for it is partially it's the only death we really get to see. Not the only, but I guess it's one of the deaths we actually get to see another person's reaction to. And I think that's part of it because we see lots of people die, but it matters to varying degrees throughout the book. But on this page, like, this baby's death really matters, right? Like, that transition from the mother carrying the bottle to that word balloon that's, like, a really scratchy and just, like, forceful no, and it's got a red background in the word balloon. Like, I think it's... Like, the composition of the page is really well done for what it is, too. It really hits you hard because of that.
I will want to talk about this page again when we come back around and talk about my second question.
Your question part B. Good.
Yeah.
Mike's question again. How did we manage to break the format of the podcast before we
invited
started
Michael Richard Drew to this series, this mini series?
How did we do it?
Micro series. What?
But Pat, you have not said your answer to the question yet.
I think I would say I don't know. I'm sort of torn between two. One, I guess, is technically not a death because I think they said he's still alive. But the mother of the woman who's addicted to the dream sand, the father, sorry, of the woman who's addicted to the dream sand, who's like spread out on the walls of the apartment as like a living film of human flesh. I mean, that's not really a death, but it's still pretty fucked up. So that's up there. But I think the one that's the actual answer is the nurse that Dee gets a ride with. We spend the majority of an issue, what is that, 6?
No, it would be 5, right? Because it's right before 24 hours. Yeah,
Yes.
it would be 5.
It's the woman that he kidnaps to drive him away from Arkham, and
Yeah,
he's
which,
holding
dear
her at
God.
gunpoint. And she's obviously trying to talk him down. We get to find out that she's a nurse, that she starts to empathize with D and like his condition. She offers him her husband's coat and his lunch, and we feel like D is sort of opening up to her. And you think, okay, she's gonna get out of this, but no, like he steps out of it, says, "Is your husband actually a mobster?" She says, "No." Is it? Oh, well, that wouldn't have changed anything really, and then shoots her, and that's
And
how it
she's
ends.
so like calm at that point. Like she thinks she's navigated her way out of this and actually bonded with this guy
Yeah, she's
and
almost like
Yep.
befriended him,
just has no idea that he's
It's
wishes
coming.
him well, and he steps out and then shoots her. Just like, oh, game, it just like gut punches you. Like the art is really good too because you don't see it coming, and all of a sudden it's just the end of the pistol and like blood spray.
Yeah, and I think comics especially do that aspect of horror really well, where you can show stuff without showing stuff. Like you can have something taking place off panel, but still imply that it's happening, and that's usually more powerful, right? Like,
Mhm.
Yeah, that one is a rough one. I don't disagree with you, Patrick. It's especially since you get to see so much of her personality. Like she's actually a character by the end of the issue, and then she's not.
And they don't really like they don't show you, but then they show you like her hanging outside of her door. Like it's just, and he just walks away and doesn't look at her or think about her again. It really
right?
does a good job of setting up D as just like an insane madman. Just
Yeah, I don't think I'd actually noticed that she's like just an afterthought on the bottom of page 155 before you
no,
said
because the
that.
focus is on his ruby. Like, oh, he's got
Yeah,
his ruby back. Oh, look, there's that innocent woman who just lost her life because she showed human empathy towards a monster.
that bit where she's like, where he says he's from Arkham and she's like, oh, like,
Yeah,
I-
just like,
I'm kind of surprised neither of you picked or mentioned John Constantine.
Constantine.
Kind of surprised neither of you picked his um former lover Rachel, or like that we didn't really discuss it because that one to me was kind of gruesome and also heartbreaking because she just got into something she didn't understand and like
I guess because there's not as much humanizing of her as a character.
yeah, completely, right? Like you don't get to know her even in the same way honestly you get to know like that mother in the 2 panels she's on like in the
Mhm.
story.
Well,
Yep.
you can empathize with the mother, and it's hard to empathize with the addict whose addiction has hurt so many people. Like we get to see like the effects of her addiction
Yeah,
on,
she
like I
turned
say,
her
her
father into a
father.
skin wall, so I mean
Yeah, and
Points
like
for me.
all this weird stuff is happening because she is abusing
Sand.
powers beyond her. Yeah, don't abuse sand, kids. All right.
no, but I still felt for her, like especially because the stuff she was messing with at that point was so far beyond the normal stuff she was already addicted to.
Sure.
So I don't know. That was probably my runner-up, actually. And I figure I get to talk about it because I picked the same one as mine.
That is a fair runner-up too. I didn't. I do think I fell into the less empathy for that character category, just because you do see how much pain she caused to not only our main character but everyone around her. So maybe that's not fair of me, but no, it's not a good one either. And there's that. I guess the heart of me doing a question is, why is there so much death when the main character is Dream? It seems like the characterization is backwards a little bit.
Well, that's a great transition to my question, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, so mine is from Morpheus's actions in this first volume. What kind of person or personification do you consider him to be? So, like Mike was pointing out, in that issue with John Constantine, John has to convince Morpheus to put this woman out of her misery. Morpheus was completely fine with just leaving once he got his pouch of sand back. So he seems a little indifferent to this woman's pain. Like, what do you guys think about our
I
friend
was thinking
Dream?
about how to like succinctly wrap this up earlier today, and I think my like summarized statement, which probably needs to be unpacked, is Morpheus is cold but can be reminded that he should not be. If that makes sense.
But it takes
Like,
an external source to remind him not to be.
yeah, and that happens a couple times in this volume actually, right? It happens when John like asks him to put Rachel out of her misery, and he smile like I'm not sure exactly if it's a smile when he does that, but like it looks like Sam Keith is drawing him smiling as he kind of sends her off into sleep and then death. That panel on 102 where he's kind of
Mhm.
covering her body, like it looks like a twinge of a smile.
I don't think I noticed that.
I it's probably questionable, honestly.
I mean, I think the smile is more that it's her at peace that he's smiling at.
Well,
Is that
that's the
what you're
thing,
getting
right?
at?
Is like if he didn't care, why would he be smiling, right? He would just be, oh, I did my job. And in that same volume, John asks him for that favor where he's like, hey, could I have nice dreams for once? My dreams have been really bad for 10 years. And that's another time where he is empathetic, but has to be asked, like has to be directly asked or prompted to be empathetic, right? And it definitely happens in the last issue, the death issue, where he's basically just like, he's depressed, right? Like he may even be clinically depressed. He's like, yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
did this thing and I thought it would make me happy and it didn't, and I'm still not happy. What's going on? And death pops up and kind of reminds him, like, hey, this is what we do and why we do it. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. But like, do you think that's gonna stick? That seems like a guy who could easily relapse. I don't know.
I had not formulated a full answer to your question, Patrick.
That's okay. We can work it out here.
Say, we're here, we're talking.
I don't actually. I think in this issue he is about as dark comes, because I mean we're introduced to him during a century of isolation and imprisonment. Basically a toy being played with by children who don't understand what they have, and then we see him during that century basically. I mean, it specifically said that time doesn't pass faster for him, so I can imagine if if Destiny was insane in this, he probably, like, Morpheus wasn't all put together at the beginning either. So I don't know. I don't see him as being mentally stable at any point in this series or at any point in this issue, except maybe at the end when he's finally back together with Death and getting to experience a little bit of family and familial connection again.
Well, even in
And
that issue, doesn't he say to Death that he's much more terrible than anything that Death would be?
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's something, because I mean you don't typically think of dreams as being scary. I mean, unless you have
Oh,
like
please, Mike. There's an entire class of dreams that is just scary dreams. It's called nightmares.
okay, well, okay, when I think of dreams, I don't typically think of nightmares because I don't know. I guess I'm lucky enough not to have many. But I don't know. I tend to reverse that. I would say I'm more afraid of death than I am of dreams. And it's not the case when I look at the characters in this book. I think if I have to classify one of these characters that I'm more fearful of, I would say I would be far more comfortable with death than with dream.
I
Well,
think that's probably the moral of that last issue, anyways, is that you've seen Dream to be this. I don't foreboding. Like his revenge is foremost in his mind for the majority of it, and getting back his power. And as Matt pointed out, the only time he does anything like selflessly is at the prompting of others.
There is one bit where he's like actually empathetic without prompting, and it's like his handling of Dr. Destiny.
Which I
You
don't
just kind of
understand. Of all the people that he exercises any kind of like compassion toward, it's the man who murdered, I don't know, 8 people in a diner plus drove countless others insane through his actions. So it's a strange place that we see him show, because yeah, he just takes him back to Arkham, right?
yeah.
He doesn't leave him waking like he does the son of the man who imprisoned him.
I got
But
the answer.
yeah, go ahead.
I know. So he can relate to Destiny, because Destiny is obvious. He's not sane. Like the guy's fucking nuts. And Morpheus was in the same boat. Like I do think that Morpheus had a break at the beginning of this. Like leaving the son of the man who imprisoned him in constant waking. That's not a decision that it's not a sane decision. That's a I'm off my rocker decision, and I'm punishing you because you're here.
At least I'm very pissed off
Yep.
decision, which fair.
Which, I mean, it's fair, yes, but I don't. I think he sympathizes with D more than maybe led to C initially, because of his earlier struggles in this story.
I thought it was more that D accidentally gave him back his full power by destroying the ruby.
I mean, there's
And
that too.
in like the flush of more power than he's felt in what he said, like a millennia. Like he hasn't been this powerful in thousands of years. He decided to be empathetic, to show mercy towards this monster, which he hasn't shown towards anyone. Like I don't. It was a weird. It's a weird thing for a protagonist to do after we spent an entire issue with D torturing people.
But does Dream care about 8 people at a diner? Like,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is the titular Sandman. This is the main character of this series, and he's not he's not a good person or personification, right? He's
I like actually that you like took the care to specify in the question, like even when you texted it to us initially, like person or personification, because he's not person, right? Like
He's not
right.
a person.
he's by definition not person. He's a thing. He's a concept. He's the representation of a concept, and like concept doesn't give a shit about people. I think is what we've learned a little bit, but he also does, right? Or like he kind of wants to, I think, or
Well,
he used to and he forgot how, but sometimes he can be reminded. I
well,
think is part
yeah.
of it.
We see in hell, Etergon leads them past the sinners in cages, and one of them is a former lover of his that he
Oh,
himself damned to hell thousands of years ago.
Yeah, dude
And
is cruel.
they
Dude,
reach out to him for forgiveness, and Morpheus says, "No, I haven't forgiven you yet. I still love you. I will always love you, but I haven't forgiven you."
yeah, and those two things are inevitably wrapped up with each other, I'm sure. If he didn't still love her, he probably would have forgiven her.
So
by
at the same,
now.
yeah, so he is at once remote and distant as a personification of an idea, but he also is able to love someone, which is a very personal thing. So yeah, he's a dichotomy. He's a
Yeah, he's kind of contradictory in here, but not in a way that doesn't make sense, right? Like, there's a thing in fiction where people expect people to like behave consistently all the time, right? And if they don't, it's like, oh, the character's like not behaving the way they should. But like, people are wildly inconsistent, so really, it works out as long as you do it in a way that people are consistently inconsistent, if that makes sense. And I think he is. Like, I think
I
the
mean, this is the
moments.
very first issue. They're just introducing the idea
Yeah, so
of.
you're still trying
Yeah.
to figure it out, right? Which is a great lead into my question, but we're not there yet. But
I think they talk about like they mentioned the endless like once or twice in this.
you see Destiny in one panel, who I think was a pre-existing character, actually.
Yes, he was afraid to turn the page when D and Morpheus were fighting.
And you see Death, obviously, at the end. So,
I
Right.
didn't even see that.
And they list a couple other like despair I think,
Yeah, she says
and
something about
desire.
desire, I think, in the last volume too, or last chapter, sorry.
So they list a couple of them, and they toy with like D names a little bit, but they don't really get so like Gaiman's setting up the world that's going to come, but he's just like testing the waters at this point. All right, Mike, you want to jump into your B question?
Sure, we'll do question B. Question B is there's a lot of very very off the wall art in this story. I'm not gonna call myself in any version of an expert on comic books, but I have quite a collection of DC books at this point, and I don't even think that this art carries over to the rest of this series. Um, like just with the representations of various groups of people, like in the very first couple stories, how they represent aging, I guess, the process of getting older, and that's like they are made to look like people, just normal people are made to look terrifying. And I'm not sure if that's because I guess my question is um, how the art is used to convey feeling about characters in this story, because it seems that there is intentional ugliness put into characters and scenes where the characters are not meant to be relatable or empathetic or likable.
I think
Sure.
even some of the likable characters are like represented in a way that you don't see in, like you said, like the normal DC comics, right? Like
Yeah,
Kat, every time Kat comes on this podcast, I think she mentions that she likes comics where people look like people and they're not all like buff supermodels wearing spandex or
Well, there's
whatever.
some peoply looking people in this one.
Yeah, right? Like this is a peoply people book. And I think part of it's just because that's who the artists are in this one. And like, not to tip my hand, but I want to talk about the art change as part of my question when we get there. So I'm probably not going to go super deep into that right this second. But the other thing is like, it's a horror book, right? So it has to be like, it has to be unsettling and like, it has to be weird and it has to be quote unquote real, right? Because you're like, it's not a power fantasy like a superhero comic. It's supposed to skeeve you out. It's supposed to like make you afraid. So, especially initially, like it's definitely a horror book. I think as you transition towards the back half of the book, it's
I think it.
more of a fantasy?
I
Question
think the
mark?
horror gets more fantastic, if that's what you're talking about. But I think
Okay, yeah, that's close to what I'm saying, I think.
it never strays too far from the grotesque. I mean, it's always there, and I think that's what you're sort of getting at, Mike, is that there's always an underline of unease. Like there's always something there, either gore or like you like disfigured people or yeah, the demon hellscapes that we're brought to.
Or even just like a simple shadow, like in the last volume with Death, which I think is the least horror volume of all the, or chapter. God, Mike, now you got me doing it.
sorry.
Even in that last chapter, they're the pigeons, like the shadows on their wings, I think, are meant to continue to give you that sense of like there's something there besides the real world. Like there's an undercurrent of like more serious and more supernatural stuff that like this book is going to deal with.
Inversely, like you see various scenes where the art is, yeah, I guess, far less scary. Like I'm gonna redirect back to the page with the baby death. My volume has 228, where like the art, it, it's not a scene. Like okay, the depicted thing is terrifying to me, utterly terrifying. But like, it's not it. This page, for some reason, is there's I'm sure there's others that I would be able to point out to that are I see that are far more comforting than others. And this is one where it weirds me out that there are that the art does that, because it seems to clear up when, I mean, there's a patently awful thing happening, but it's not depicted as eerily as other actions and other things that we've seen.
I mean, part of that's what Pat was saying earlier, right? About this is supposed to be depicted as a moment that's just taking place in the world and it takes place all over the world all the time, right? And that's part of what's scary about it is this could happen at any time, and that's part of why it skeeves you as a parent out, I think.
Yeah.
So there's that, but like we can also pick it apart further, right? Like the top 5 panels are kind of like orderly. There's the 2 panels at the top, there's 3, and they're kind of like all not even, but like there's an order to it, right? Like your eye
Yeah.
kind of sees it as a stack of panels. And then as you transition down to that big bottom one that's so much bigger than the ones at the top, there's that tilt and like the blue line around that panel where the bottle breaks and like
Yep.
that throws you right out of the order that was composed in those first 5 panels. Like everything's going the way it's supposed to in the world for the first 1 to 5 panels of this page, and then panel 6, the world drops out literally. Like the bottle drops and breaks, and that like I can't get over actually that speech balloon now that I keep looking at it. Like I really like the choice of using red there to contrast all the other stuff happening on the page. So there's a reason it gives you the feelings it does, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I agree. So I think that I don't have much more to say on my last question. So Matt, what was yours?
I don't know. Pat, did you have anything you wanted to say about like did you have a particular sequence or page that you found unsettling?
I mean, nothing terribly. I mean, the events in the diner are all pretty horrific.
Yeah,
I think
like
it's all the personal stories more so than like the gore that it shows.
yeah, there's a little bit of caricature in that one that makes like sets it apart from some of the for lack of a better term like
It's more
like
just we get to know Gaiman has us get to know each of the characters and like a little bit of their motivations and what makes them tick, and then we get to see them literally picked apart in front of us
yeah,
and turned into nothing more than just like meat puppets.
like
And
puppets, yeah, and like partly picked apart by each other, right? Which is
it's more
also
just like,
unsettling.
yeah, it's disturbing and it's like you can't look away from it. And at the same time you're intrigued. Just like, where is this gonna go? And that's the stuff that really like, it entices me. Like it's Gaiman's weird twist that he always throws into most of the stuff he does. I'm a big fan of dark fantasy, and like this is just probably the quintessential series for dark fantasy.
Yeah, especially as we get later in the first volume, and I actually meant to say volume this time.
Look at you.
So, related to that feeling, actually, the sequence I was kind of thinking about, at least the way I was thinking about the question earlier today, is actually the sequence where Dr. Destiny is just by himself in that white space in what did be issue
After he thinks
7?
that he's
In Dreams,
killed
yeah.
Like,
Dream.
just crushed the ruby, right? And he thinks he's basically omnipotent at that point.
Yeah,
You've got that sequence where it's just him on the blank page, which is not like anything else we've seen in the comic so far, right? Like up to then, the comic is basically a standard comic with some weird paneling, some different page choices and stuff, but pretty standard. And then you get that blank page, and you're like, oh, this is different. And you get a repeat of it, and you then get the 6 panels of him gloating, and then you turn the page, and God, it's like such a great choice to put it on the page turn. You turn the page and Dream is holding him in his hand, and that's why the page was white on the other side, because he's literally been up against Dream's skin because Dream is holding him in his hand. And I think that to me told me that this book is gonna be more fantastical than it had been up to that point, right?
sure.
So that's where I started getting that sort of dark fantasy vibe,
You
or
only
had it
started it at
cemented.
that point.
I think cemented
We've
for
been to
sure.
the pits of hell and back, and but it's
The Pits of
the
Hell are still a horror thing, kind of though. Like
Yeah, I
they're
mean,
not. What was that, Mike?
yeah, that's some horror stuff right there.
Like it's not as fantasy. It's more in the wheelhouse still of hey, we're doing a horror book, but like the
all right.
personification of dreams now is like literally larger than life and holding you in his hand is a pretty big moment to me. And like it's unsettling in a different way, not unsettling in like a scary way, but unsettling in an unnerving way, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Like I was trying to think about your rebuttal of it, like the hell stuff being the moment that it could be that like it turns into a dark fantasy, and I think
I think if it were just the fact that he makes deals with the three lords of hell and like there's a obviously a personal history between him and Lucifer, that gets more fantasy for me. The fact that Lucifer sees him as an equal, if not a rival, because Dream has always been like he was there when Lucifer fell.
yeah, and I think the the rap battle in hell is definitely
Not my
more.
favorite part, but
Oh, that
yeah.
was
Really, I quite like that bit.
Dance Off. Dance Off to Save the Universe. Wait, no, that's Marvel.
I don't know. I think that gets back into like the art shift that I think you'll address in your question coming up, Matt. That
Yeah, I think we're basically there, right? So
yeah,
my question is for you guys, in what chapter of this book does Sandman become Sandman? Which just to say, like, where is it recognizably the series that it's going to be for the next, what, it's 60 issues, right? So 50 some and change. Like, at what point would you be like, oh, this is Sandman. Like, this is the book that I'm going to be reading for the next 50 issues, and like, this is what I have, like, what I expect the rest of it to be like, because we've already all read all of it, obviously.
Oh yeah. I think it's the last one for me. Like I there I think I do expect there to be an undercurrent of darkness, of course, throughout the entirety of it. But I think it doesn't until we actually get to the end where we're with death. I don't think that I really feel that it's Sandman quite yet. That he's quite all there. Like he's assembling himself. It almost seems throughout this book until the
I mean literally at times. Yeah.
yeah
Yeah.
until he ultimately gets all of his parts back, but isn't able to function correctly. And at the end, we're finally seeing him. I mean, still partially, yes, but finally getting to a point where he can act as a whatever individual, whatever he is, an individual personification.
I mean, he's also
Yeah.
solved the initial, like, MacGuffin quest of the series, right? So basically, the series' initial, hey, here's a kick and we're off, is done, and now Gaiman gets to explore, like, okay, past that initial story, what is this book about? So I think it's a good argument, I think, actually, and I think you're in good company because from reading the back of the book, it sounds like Neil Gaiman agrees with you.
No, I think you're right, Mike. I think obviously the last issue with death is like quintessential Sandman, but I think it starts on that path for me at least with the Constantine story when he goes looking for his pouch of sand and the whole premise of this woman who's flawed in and of herself, but she's come across this thing that's beyond her and has fallen victim to it. Just really feels like Sandman to me.
Yeah, it really does, right? And I think part of that is that it's a story that's not actually about Dream, which is the secret of Sandman, is that so much of it's not actually about Dream.
Yeah, and I love that. I'm pretty sure it's a future story, but there's a now you're gonna have to help me with the hero's name, but there's a transmuter hero who can like form their bodies into different elements, and
Oh,
it's
you're
like an
talking about Lady
Egyptian curse.
Metamorpho, another reason that this book is DC as hell.
Yeah, and but that one I really appreciate because I love her story. It's so tragic,
Yeah.
but it reminds me so much of this first story of this woman who's encountered a thing that's beyond her and it's destroyed her through almost no fault of her own. It's just because she came across it, and it's just I think yeah I think that story is where we see the first taste of what the Sandman series will become.
I definitely think it has a lot of elements that are like key elements of the series, right? Like you kind of get Dream's struggle with himself too, of like what kind of person he is, which I think really interests you, Pat, obviously, because it was your discussion question of like
Right.
what kind of person is the Lord of Dreams? Like he's still figuring it out himself after having been trapped for a lifetime. So yeah, I think that's a good argument too. And as I was thinking about it, I think you could really almost make the case for anywhere between that issue and the last issue. I don't think it's one of the first two. I think the first two are out. Because the first one's just set up and nonsense, and like it's basically a Crypt Keeper tale or something, right? Like it's whatever.
But interestingly, Gaiman does take a few of those characters, and we come back to them later in the
Yeah, but
series.
that's just because he's very good. You didn't know that.
Set up and payoff, man. It's so good.
It's just because he's very good. It's not because he actually knew what was going on. Or maybe he did. Feel free to at me. um, but I think the second issue really isn't either, because that one's also just like so much setup for. It's very plot based, right? And I think Sandman at its core is not plot based; it's character based.
Yeah.
And that third issue is the first one that's character based, which is why I think that's a good choice.
Well, the first issue we spend time with characters we're not gonna see. Like,
No.
Yeah, and also like
one's
who
gonna
cares?
die,
I
the
don't
other
care
one's gonna
about
be.
like
Yeah.
Aleister Crowley the second or whatever
Yep.
his name is.
Right. Yeah.
Like a bunch of old evil British guys got their comeuppance. Cool, did it. I'm
That's
glad.
the start
But
of
like
zero.
Rachel, I care about. Constantine, I care about. Like even Chaz, I kind of care about in that story, although partially because I've seen Chaz and other stuff. But
Yeah. Read Hellblazer. It's great.
yeah. For me, actually, I think it's the art shift that solidifies it for me because I think a lot of the elements of Sandman are there in 3 and 4, and I think 5 is the last one that Sam Keith does the pencils for because that's the one where he's in the car with the lady who's driving him, Dr. Destiny.
Yeah. Let's get her name. I'm gonna look it up. Go ahead.
I don't. Does she have a name? She must
think
have a
so.
name. That's a Neil
I think
Gaiman
she introduces
story.
herself. Yeah. I'll find it. Keep going.
Okay, Rosemary it is. I just saw it.
There you go.
So he's in the car with Rosemary, right? And like each of those stories has a lot of the elements of what Sandman is. Like even Passengers is like Dream's not in half of it, right? Which again is the secret of Sandman. It's most compelling when Dream's not there. Maybe not most, but it's usually quite compelling when Dream's not there. And even like some of the elements where John Jones sees him differently than like Earth people see
Love
him,
that the fact that the Martians have worshipped him for eons
like
before
that's a super
mankind.
key that comes back in different stories throughout too, and like that's actually a really big part of Overture, which we are going to read as part of this regardless of the fact that it's not original run because it's interesting.
The fact that Dream has many names, but he has also taken many forms. It's a really cool premise.
Yeah, and I also really like that bit in that story where John tells Mr. Miracle that he was talking to an old god because Mr. Miracle's a new god. Again,
new
DC
god.
Comics bullshit as hell.
It's true.
It goes on the DC shelf. So like there's elements in that one. I think the battle in hell has a lot of stuff too that's very Sandman, like even though that one's a little bit more MacGuffin based
It gets
than
a
some of
little
the other
too
ones.
wacky for me with the thong wearing demon with two mouths. I don't
I
know.
mean, yeah. So that's the thing though. That's why I think
Hey.
24 hours is where it shifts for me is like I think once Mike Dringenberg takes over on art and really opens things up to be like, hey, this doesn't have to be a normal horror comic. Like you don't have to do normal panels and like normal layouts and like you can get experimental on the page. You can like blend different textures and like photorealism, like do some photorealism stuff with buildings. Like 24 hours is a weird looking story, and then the next story, Sound and Fury, is like even weirder looking, right? To where we get to the point where I talked about that situation where Dr. Destiny's standing in Dream's hand. Like I think that for me is a like such a hallmark of Sandman stories, just like weird, cool ass art that is experimental and makes you think differently about how comic books can be structured, even that I don't think you're all the way there until at least 24 hours. And I think 24 hours, well, it goes a little bit harder than I remember. Like, also
It's real
does that
hard.
thing of him barely being in the book so well that I love it. Like, he's in two panels of that story, right? Dream.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right too.
So that's my argument. My argument is that it's when the art shifts because I think that's everyone has kind of come to the decision that the previous art does not fit what the book is, which means they kind of know what the book is or what they want it to be at least.
I'd also like to circle back around and say that that we here at Waiting at the Trade support those who wear thongs. This demon who wants to wear a thong, we support you.
You can wear whatever clothes you want on Waiting on the Trade. We don't have video, so.
It was just a tone
No,
shift
no,
that I
no.
wasn't quite ready for.
Yeah, I do think they talk in the back of this a little bit too about how like Sam Keith just kind of wasn't the right fit for the book, and I think you see that in some of the stuff like that where it's not quite as fantastical as you would hope, if that makes sense. Like you can kind of even feel them fighting in that Hell story, I feel like, because Mike Dringenberg's inking it at that point, and that page where Dream is talking to Lucifer looks like a page from later in the book. It doesn't look like a Sam Keith drawn page.
Yeah, for sure.
Look at
Can
it
we-
just thogged out.
Oh god, that and like the weird shape of Morpheus's palace. There's a goddamn throbbing penis in the middle of his dream palace, and it's just unnecessary.
Oh, I
Just
didn't
gonna
even
say right
notice
now.
that, Pat.
Is
Hang
there?
on.
Wait,
Give me a page number, Pat, if you got it.
It's like a thought bubble of what his palace looked like in its prime. It's literally a veiny
Oh no, I'm
penis.
looking at it in its disheveled state with
Either
Lucian
way, it's
standing
still
outside
there.
it. It's a broken down but still fully erect penis on this page.
I just like
Ramshackle but still functional on page 66.
like the palace of Lucifer also looked phallic. It's like, okay, well, demons, what are you gonna do? But then the dream palace is like, why?
And everyone's just a little mushy when Sam Keith
It is
drawing too.
loose and squishy, yeah.
he likes the penises. What can I say?
Okay, everyone's dreams are different.
I see it. It's a dilapidated penis where I'm looking at it, but it's.
It looks kind of like that space shuttle Jeff Bezos was using to fly into space.
What is up with it, right? Good lord. But yeah, then like the scene with the Hecate, like they're all just smushy.
Yeah, they're super squishy for sure.
It's just faces that are just floating. Yeah, it's just
Like,
not.
imagine how different a book it would be if Sam Keith drew all of it, right? Like,
Right.
which no one draws all of Sandman, which is part of its appeal. But that kind of wasn't the rule back in like. This is sort of the first Vertigo book, I think. Also, I think Karen Berger kind of used how successful this was to be like, "Hey, look, we can do this. Let me do this with more books."
Yeah.
So, like,
I
they're
do- yeah.
kind of breaking rules in this thing, which is good.
I do think the art shift helps substantially, but like I say, I think the story gets there faster than the art.
Yeah, I think I agree with you actually. Like, I think there's definitely an argument for anywhere between 3 and 8, with 3 and 8 being really good choices for the reasons you guys laid out.
Yeah.
I like that we all picked a different one though. I was worried.
Hey, if you're going to bet on anything, it's us arguing different points of view. That's what we do.
That's what we do. Yeah.
It's true.
Wait, we can't agree on this point. Damn it.
How is that? Oh, shit. Right. Fuck.
We've broken ourselves again.
One podcast host always tells the truth. The other podcast host always tells lies.
The other one is just there.
The other one just tries to wrangle the other two.
In that case, that does it for our first entry of the Dream Journal. Hope you listeners enjoyed the quote-unquote tighter format. We'll see what this runtime is once I'm editing it. I have no idea.
It's going to be so tight
It's
and
gonna
well
be peachy
structured.
Peachy keen.
I'll just cut all the nonsense Mike said, and that should give me a solid 20 minutes.
You can cut me ranting about whether it's a chapter or a volume, and that's a good 10 minutes right there.
If it makes any sense.
Oh, no.
Alienating the blue collar man when taking out Mike.
You're the blue-collar man? Okay.
I don't fucking know. Just
All right.
He appeals to the blue collar man.
Oh.
Is what he's saying.
Okay. I got
As
you.
we know, you don't have to be a blue collar man to appeal to the blue collar
I thought Toriyama appeals to. Never mind. Expect this series to pop up every now and then between our normal monthly comic podcasts. Next time we'll be talking about Volume 2, The Doll's House. Till then, be sure to steer clear of any old men carrying rubies at your local diner. See you guys.
good night.
Bye.